Hello, you lovely people, and welcome back to Sabbatical Stories. I'm your host, Bex Thomas, and I'm coming to you today from Manly in Sydney. I'd therefore like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the Gamagal people. I pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people listening today. I set up this podcast to inspire courage and normalise taking a break from your career, and that is exactly what today's guest is all about. Patrick Mazzocco, a doctoral candidate and programmes coordinator at University of Otago, joins us today. He's currently midway through his PhD research, which is looking at the motives, experiences and outcomes of those who decide to take a career break. His research looked at people who left their jobs without any real kind of financial support from their current employers or any kind of agreement that they would return to the role at the end of their career break. He joins us to share not only his personal sabbatical story, but also some of the findings of his research, and they are super interesting. I would love it if you could help by subscribing, liking and rating the show. It really would mean a lot. This is a fascinating discussion and one I highly encourage you not to miss. Deep down, you've tried, dig deep, search wide, enjoy your climb, it's all for you. Patrick, thank you so much for being with us here today on Sabbatical Stories. And as it's your story, could you please share the background of your sabbatical story and give an introduction to our listeners of Patrick?
The simplest version is I was in my early 20s and followed this life plan that was in front of me that made a lot of sense, and went to uni and did well and got a job. And at a certain point, I remember waking up and thinking like, man, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I'll be 20 years older and nothing will have changed. Like, I just feel like I'm missing out on something key in life and I don't know what it is. No one in my family had ever done anything like a career break or a sabbatical, so to speak. And I started delving into that and exploring it. And I kind of made a decision like, I'm going to do this. And I did it with a lot of pushback from family and friends. Got through that first career break and it was really transformative and life altering. Came back, thought I would be a totally different person, renewed. Like I just needed to get this out of my system. I just scratch that wanderlust itch and I'll be fine. And I came back and I was like, I almost felt worse. Like I was like, I don't fit into this life and like I thought I would. I thought I'd go do this and then I'd be normal and I'd be fine and I could settle into a nice conventional life. And it never happened. So I took another career break and that one was also transformative. And then finally I'm getting to a point in my 20s where it's like, I want to settle into a career. So luckily I fell into career counseling. That was really great. It was something where I could use all those experiences and those struggles and finding this, like, what am I supposed to do with my life and trying all these different things. And all these different experiences I had from my career breaks really benefited me in that counseling space because I found it very easy to relate to all the students I was working with. You know, if they were, I know what I want to do with my life, it's like, cool, let me help you do that. Or it's like, I don't know what I want to do, I'm having a crisis. It's like, yeah, been there. Well, you'll be fine. Let's talk about it. And I just really liked that space. And so I went and got a master's, and at the end of that, I was like, I need another career break. And so I took a third one, and then COVID happened, and then counseling. And then I was like, I want to do a PhD. And that's where I'm at now. I'm in New Zealand at University of Otago, about 1 year to go on my PhD.
And where's home? Where are you from originally?
Illinois, specifically Champaign, Illinois.
So far from home. And the career counselling piece, what were the ages of, the students that you were counselling?
17, like first in uni, all the way up to 40s, like graduate students, like doctoral candidates. So across the spectrum, people with lots of professional experience, people with none, lots of different backgrounds. The most common thing was students either in their first year who were like, I don't know what I want to do with my life. I haven't found my thing, this one thing I'm meant to do. Or students who were graduating with their bachelor's who had spent 3 or 4 years studying one thing and were suddenly like, wow, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I made a mistake. What do I do now? My whole life is ruined. I just spent all this time and money getting this degree to do this one thing, and now I don't want to do it. Like, do I have to start all the way over again? Like, what am I going to do now? And I really liked being that person to be like, you're going to be fine. It's okay. Like, and I didn't know it at the time, really, the connection to my research now, but I just knew from my own life experiences, like, that was so normal. But at 20 years old, 18 to 22 years old, it doesn't feel normal. It feels like a crisis. And I really enjoyed being that person to like be like, it's okay. You're going to be fine.
And before we jump into your research and the whole, one of the main reasons that you're joining us today, just want to touch on something you mentioned, which was the pushback on actually the career breaks that you were taking. Can you give us a little bit more insight into what that pushback was, where it came from, the sort of stories it came from, and then how you overcame that? Because it's, I think, a really key issue that we've explored previously in the podcast, but also that the audience are really, really interested about.
I mean, like my family, very, I wouldn't say like traditional in that, very rigid sense, but definitely like, you go to school, go to university, get a degree, get a job, have a family, be a good citizen, be a good person, enjoy life, but don't do anything crazy.
Don't rock the boat.
And don't rock the boat. I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm a millennial, or maybe it's because I went to a uni that was like a little further away from where I grew up and just got exposed to so many things. I really couldn't tell you where this discontentment came from. But I just remember kind of near the end of uni really starting to like question this whole like, is this really what I want? This whole like predictable conventional pathway. And at the time, it was a lot of conflict with family and friends, just I don't want this, and then being concerned because I couldn't really articulate where that was coming from. And especially after I found this nice job at a nice company just outside of Chicago after graduating and had a nice apartment and, a salary and all the things, parents want for their kids. Like I'm stable, but I'm 23 years old and I'm just feeling nothing but this discontentment and like this missing piece. And what I figured out later, much later, was it was just from having a lack of confidence or self-efficacy from having lived, having like done something that I could like rely on and feel like I had achieved something. Like, yeah, I went to uni and got a bachelor's. Yeah, I got a job, but I've never really been put in a state to like figure out who I am and what matters to me and what my values are. It's just like they've kind of just been handed down to me. And luckily they're good values, that my parents gave my siblings and me, but I never got to like figure out for myself what those meant and what those looked like. And so I think I remember I made a list. I made a list of 3 things that I wanted my life to include. I was like imagining when I'm retired, what are 3 things I want to be able to look back on and feel proud of? And I said, I want to do something artistic. I want to work with animals, and I want to live overseas. That was as specific as they got.
Wow.
That was it. Like I didn't know what
and
they looked like.
23?
Yeah. I was 20, 22,
Wow.
23 and had no experience with any of those things. I had no artistic abilities. I had never worked with animals, and I didn't even have a passport. I'd never been outside the United States. But those things like sounded good to me in the moment, like without any kind of smart goal setting, just no nonsense, just me listening to like, what do I want? What's going to make me happy? And those things sounded intriguing. And then eventually a plan kind of manifested through exploration and talking to people. And so that first career break, like I went and worked as a horse wrangler in Arizona and like a bit in New Mexico. And then I went and taught English in Thailand. And then I took up photography and started a photography business. And then my next career break was road tripping across the United States, taking photos for people and selling those, and working with horses again. And through those things, I'm going into them thinking like, this is my thing. I'm going to make this my thing. I'm going to go all in, and this will be my purpose, and really liking them. But then at a certain point, kind of feeling like, yeah, this has run its course. Yeah, this was fun, and it was great, but I've had enough of it, and I'm ready to move on to the next thing. And after you do that for a while, you're 25, 26, and then other people are like, okay, you've spent 3 years, having your little adventure. It's time for you to settle down. Stop being such a. I remember someone called me a tumbleweed. Someone called me a job hopper. I got called lots of names. It wasn't until I kind of fell into that career counseling accidentally that things just kind of started to make sense. All those experiences suddenly had not just meaning to me, but like value to someone else.
It's like giving away your gift, isn't it? And I can't remember who says it, but it's that whole finding your purpose is actually giving away that gift and your purpose. And what was it inside you that didn't listen to all the name callings and thought, no, do you know what? I'll be a tumbleweed and that's fine. Like, I don't know, where did you find the courage to go, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to pursue what I want to pursue?
That's hard because I didn't really have like a role model for that. No one in my family did anything like this. And it wasn't like I found some book or anything, or, saw some movie. I think it was genuinely, it's like I just knew like if I didn't do those things, then I was going to always feel very held back. And knowing I didn't want to like wait 40 years to have those experiences, I'm in my 20s. I don't have any commitments, connections, like I don't have debt. I had this rare opportunity of just untethered freedom, and I recognized how rare that was, and I was going to take advantage of it.
And why not?
And I don't mean to paint my family as being very, very against it. I mean, they were supportive. Like my folks, as much as they were like, "Are you sure? This sounds like a bad idea." They came and visited me in Thailand, and they still talk about that being like the best trip of their life because they got to see the village I was in and meet my friends. I mean, at the time, it was very concerning for them because it was coming out of nowhere. It was a very atypical behavior for me from having followed the cookie cutter path to suddenly being like, never mind, I'm going to go do all this random stuff. And so they, they're understandably concerned. But now we look back on it and it's like, I support myself. I'm good. I have a happy life. And now they look at it as like, man, it's so cool you did those things.
Yeah. And you can understand, can't you? I mean, I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine that what you want is for your child to be safe. That's where it comes from, is that, let's keep you safe. And doing all of these random things and not following that cookie cutter, safe life kind of brings feelings up in them that, as you say, concern or worried for you, or so it's kind of projecting their old stories that have been told throughout generations. So let's move on to the research. So the research is about career breaks, but other than you having had a few, talk us through how you came up with the topic and what it's about more generally.
I spent about 2.5 years before fully committing to do the PhD, kind of investigating and talking to other people I had known who had done PhDs, like, oh, tell me about it. Like, how'd you come up with your topic? And, what are some of the hard parts? And just getting my mind right for it. Is this something I really want to do? And the advice I got repeatedly was make sure you are deeply passionate about your topic because it has to sustain you for several years. It has to be something that keeps you up at night and that you enjoy reading about and you enjoy talking about and writing about. And I think for me, I just thought about like when I am having these counseling sessions with students, or I'm like running workshops and people ask me to talk, and I kind of realized like, there's really a lot of value in informal learning, these non-traditional, non-formal learning opportunities. I started to think about like, I really rely mostly as both like how I conduct myself in society and as a professional in my space on those informal learning experiences, those career breaks. And I was like, I wonder if anyone's really looked at the learning value of those. And when I looked into the research, it was mostly just very logistical. It was about like the re-entry challenges, mostly of women after having children, or it was about how career breaks negatively impact lifelong earning potential and your retirement savings. And there wasn't too much academic research about what kind of things do people learn from these experiences. How do they change? Like, what's the transformative learning? What's the decision-making process that goes into even taking a break? What are some of the challenges or concerns they have beforehand? What are the catalysts that drive them to do this? What I was finding about career breaks as I was doing my literature background, a lot of it was very anecdotal. There was a lot of anecdotal evidence on blogs and videos and podcasts, which was all great, but nothing in like a finite academic sense. And so you had this academic literature that mostly framed career breaks as this risky negative thing, and then you had the anecdotal evidence that's saying this was the most transformative thing in my life and I'm so glad I did it. And it's like, well, why aren't these two things aligned? You just talk to people and you read some more, and then all of a sudden you kind of come up to the idea of like, well, this is what I want to know. I want to know what drives people to do this, what do they do during, and then how does it affect their career development long term. So the original idea was like more about how do career breaks fit into someone's lifelong career narrative, which kind of goes into career construction theory by like Mark Savickas and a little bit with Donald Super for any listeners who care about that stuff. But it took on a whole life of its own once we started doing interviews.
And so how did you choose who you were going to have as participants and who you were going to interview?
That was challenging at first because you don't want to be comparing apples and oranges.
Yeah.
You do want to have a pretty consistent participant group. So I did a mixed methods study. So that means I did a quantitative survey followed by qualitative, like semi-structured interviews. So I'm collecting both quantitative and qualitative data. So the survey was the first step, and that was meant to be intentionally open and broad. That was originally just for anyone who considers any kind of liminal work period they classify it as a career break. We gave them a definition as like any period lasting at least 2 months when you stepped away from your professional commitments and responsibilities. So that could be, you took like an extended leave, you lost your job, you took a sabbatical, you went on parental leave, some sort of structured HR employee leave package, or you just full on quit your job, or health benefits prevented or health conditions prevented you from participating in work. And we got a lot of different insights from that. But the underlying secret was always this research was going to focus on those who took career breaks voluntarily, meaning they did so with a lot of control and autonomy over the timing, duration, and purpose of the break. I wanted to know about the people who were the risk takers. So if they took the career break voluntarily, meaning they had a lot of control over the decision-making process of when, where, and how, and then if there was no financial support from the employer, so no continued benefits, no buyout package, no continued salary or stipend, just full cessation of any kind of compensation from their job. And then if the return to that role was not expected, that means like there was no agreement in place that they were going to return to that role when they were done. Even if it was like for an indefinite period, there was no expectation of, okay, we'll see you back here in 6 to 12 months. So I was only looking at those voluntary, no financial support, no return expected. I had 214 people complete the survey from around the world. Of those, 120 matched those 3 criteria I gave you. And then there were some open text responses. And those were kind of in there both for data gathering, but also to see who's going to be insightful, who's going to be thought-provoking. If they engaged in the open text responses, which were optional, they were eligible for interviews.
And it's super interesting that that was your criteria, because if I think back over series 1 of the podcast, I would say one of the common themes that we heard was that this thought of taking a career break or a sabbatical was a seed that was sown way before the individuals actually took the break, but that there was some trigger that helped them make the decision. So there was redundancy, or there was restructure, or there was health impacts or health issues, and so actually there was probably only 1 or 2 guests, and what I'm looking for, I think, in season 2 and season 3 are those that are taking it voluntarily, because one of the biggest challenges I have seen with individuals is that decision-making process, and that whole being kind of stuck in, what do they call it, analysis by paralysis, or they sort of swing of like, oh my god, I really want to do this, but what about this, and if I do this, oh, this could happen. Or so I'd love to know, I suppose, the main reasons that you found that people were taking them voluntarily, but also any kind of hints and tips you can give the audience on, I don't know, a decision-making framework, or tips on how to actually come to that decision.
The short answer is there was no one situation. It was across the board. It was, I mean, even for the voluntary folks, it's really weird. So the way I've kind of started to kind of frame it or put it into like a visual format in my thesis is I have this matrix, or this continuum, an infinite line running along the x-axis, an infinite line running along the y-axis. So you have like these 4 quadrants. On the x-axis is job satisfaction, and that ranges from extreme job dissatisfaction. Like, I am in a trauma environment. I hate my job. I hate going to work. Just the thought of like having to get up tomorrow is awful. To I'm in my dream job. And I say dream job because I actually had participants who said they were in their dream job, the one they wanted when they were 9 years old, the one they had worked their whole life to get, and it lived up to the expectations. They loved their day-to-day tasks. They felt like they were compensated quite generously or fairly. They loved their coworkers. Everything that we all would want from a work situation. Like, why are they even here in this study? So, I mean, I had a full range as far as job satisfaction goes. And then on the y-axis running vertically is level of career success. And so at the bottom, we have those who feel like they just, whatever they do, it's never enough. They just keep trying, and it's just like they feel underappreciated, or it's just never meets the expectations of someone, and they just feel like they're underachieving. And then at the other end of that is the overachievers, who they are just setting these ambitious, high career goals, and they're crushing them. But with every accomplished goal comes the expectation that they then set a new, more ambitious career goal. And they just kind of saw through this endless cycle of like, when does this end? When do I ever get to stop setting goals and having to achieve stuff? When can I ever just be and be content? What they found was that I was never okay, or at least they didn't feel like it was. To frame it, you've got these 4 quadrants, and people kind of run between the x-axis and the y-axis. And honestly, out of my final 24 participants that we did end up interviewing, they were in all four corners. Like there were people in the lower left and the lower right and the upper left and the upper right. People who were high achieving but they were miserable. People who were underachieving but were very happy in their job, and a lot of people who were in the middle, right in the center. And so there really wasn't a singular thing from that perspective as far as like some catalyzing thing. Like, but what it showed me, and this is coming up in my thesis, is a debunking of myths. And the first myth I have in my thesis is that career breaks are born from trauma, or they're only taken as a last resort, when they're absolutely necessary. And this proves that that's not true, because I had people who were quite happy and did not need to do this, but
in their dream job even.
yeah. So why in the world are they doing this? We debunked that myth. So career breaks are not for people who are coming from like these trauma-filled environments only, or only doing this because they have no other way out, like they're escaping something. There's some other thing at play here, which didn't become clear until we got into the outcomes.
And so talk us through the why, or whether there was, I don't know, whether there was one resounding why or a few themes, and the decision-making process around that.
I would say the overall why for my participants was a lot of them had kind of become disillusioned by the idea that they had to define themselves by their job. Like the career part of their identity had become so dominant that it was like what they tied their self-efficacy and their self-worth to. Like the more I achieve, the more I climb the ladder, the more money I make, the higher my title, the more happy I'll be. And just kind of climbing this ladder or chasing these career goals, and then just never really feeling content, because what my research is going to show is that it is an insecure identity attachment. I mean, it's just so tenuous, because anything can happen with your careers. We can have a pandemic. You could get sick. You could lose your job due to budget cuts. Like anything could happen. And I think in the back of their mind, they know that it's very tenuous, and to like tie so much of their self-worth and self-efficacy and their role in society to this career. These are the people who recognize that and have the courage to kind of detach and unplug from that and see who they are without that career as the focal point of their identity.
And it's such a theme that came out of series 1, and also that is so personal to me, because my career break that was the most transformative and the longest, and where I really did, a lot of soul searching around what life I wanted to lead, was triggered by actually me fulfilling my career long dream of being promoted to director. And that whole attachment to, I had joined this company because it was global and it was prestigious, and I will never forget being at university waitressing, and I think it was a Big Four like Christmas party or something, and it was in Battersea, and it was this big marquee, and they had like a models runway up the middle, and they had ice skating over in one corner, and I thought, I want to join a company that puts on Christmas parties like this. And I remember arriving in Sydney after I'd transferred with my company, and we had this huge sales conference, and we had inside fireworks, and there were jugglers, and it was this circus, and I thought, yes, this is what I dreamed of, and I've arrived in Sydney and I'm working in Sydney. And then I get promoted to director, and it's just this, it's, as you say, it's this attachment that almost becomes unhealthy, of, if that was to go, what else is there? And so it's so interesting that was the finding, or the major finding, because I totally relate personally.
Yeah, every single participant. There was a question. I had like 12 interview questions, and they were kind of chunked in terms of like pre-career break, mid-career break, and post-career break. And in that post-career break questioning, there was a question about identity. How has your career break affected your career identity? Every single participant brought up the concept of identity before I ever got to that question. So for all of them, that was a driving thing. And just about all of them, even the ones who were happy in their job, but especially for the ones who were unhappy in their jobs, they kind of talked about how in that during career break stage, having this like 3 to 6 month period, that was especially rough. That first 3 to 6 months of a career break is the hardest. That's when you want to like retreat back into your job life, because
safe zone.
Yeah, because
where you feel like you're achieving, where you feel like you're successful, where you feel like you're normal and safe,
like who you are, like you have a purpose.
Yeah.
All of them said something along the lines of, I had an immediate identity crisis. I didn't know what my role was. Why was I even here? A lot of them were like, what's the point of life? Like I don't, what's my value? What's my purpose? And like I don't know who I am without my job. I am nothing without my job. And so like your story, I had quite a few participants who unexpectedly, without any kind of foresight, took a career break right after getting a big promotion
Mm,
because they kind of just saw like this is going to keep happening. If I don't get out now, I never will. My interview group was so diverse. So I had 24 people and they ranged from mid 20s to mid 50s. They were from 8 different countries. 6 of them were non-native English speakers.
wow.
They ranged in annual income in terms of US dollars from like less than 25,000 a year to more than 100,000 a year. I had some that had secondary high school education is the highest completion, and some who have doctorates and everything in between. Different professional backgrounds. Some were coming from broadcasting, some from healthcare, medicine, like physio and surgery, some from marketing, some from communications, some from environmental sciences and research. So they were a very, very diverse group. And then when they go into the career break, they all went about it in very different ways. And their reasons for taking a career break were very different, as I already mentioned. But even when they got into the career break, some went on these grand adventures. They went and hiked the Appalachian Trail, or they went and lived in another country and they traveled the world, crossing countries off their bucket list. But some of them stayed home. Like they didn't go anywhere special, but they had time to just
Mm,
kind of reflect and to like settle and to like not be so pulled in all these different directions and feel so obligated to others to meet others' expectations. They finally got to just like quiet this outside noise. And some of them, this is where the next part of the research gets really interesting, because in this career break stage, again, the anecdotal evidence says, oh, it's amazing. But I have quite a few participants who said it was the worst year of their life. Like it was the worst.
wow.
Yeah, yeah.
So not just the first 3 months or whatever, but actually
No,
ongoing.
no, like they had a terrible time. And what I found out and we found out later, it wasn't so much what they did during the break, it was what they anticipated the break to give them. And it was always that, oh, I'm going to have this break and I'm going to be a totally different person and I'm going to find the meaning of life and know who I am and know my purpose. And I'm going to have this cinematic aha moment where the clouds part and everything becomes clear.
Mm,
And or there was like this pressure because of that external expectation, like kind of similar to what I described as far as this pushback from family and friends. They were like, I'm going to show them, I'm going to produce something
mm,
during this break of value and I'm going to make it worth it. And so then the career break becomes more about meeting the expectations of others and not about what they need to get from it. And so that's where that's where like some people had bad experiences. It's just like they kind of made it about the wrong thing, and they didn't really listen to what they needed in that space.
it's super interesting because I always talk about solving for the why, and a career break is so personal and so individual. And the why, whether there be themes around a population taking it, everybody has their own key drivers and their own why. And I think a lot of the time, the why isn't solved on the career break, and therefore the
Yeah.
expectation doesn't meet reality. There's a gap. I think possibly that's why we're seeing the rise in the sabbatical and the career break coaching, because
Mhm.
actually, the question is, if you had somebody to be able to guide you maybe through that and to really unpack the why and unpack the fact that what you're going to do on that career break actually satisfies your personal why, and that's so individual to you and not about others' expectations and not about societal norms and what culture says that we need to be doing on a career break, and whether that actually, if you've got a guide through that time, will satisfy the why, and it not be a terrible year.
In that pre-career break questioning, like I said, we asked them about like professional background, like just as a warm-up question, like tell me about your professional history prior to your career break. And they kind of talk about like where they went to uni and what they studied and jobs they had. And then we get into decision making, like what led to you taking a career break. I also asked them kind of like how the concept entered their periphery of a career break, if it like kind of originated
Mm.
organically or if they read something or saw something. For quite a few, it did originate very organically, but then every once in a while it's like, oh, I heard this thing on a radio show where someone was going, or I read a book. And
Watched Eat, Pray, Love.
yeah, that came up. That came up. Someone might have mentioned that once or twice. And then we get into like, okay, so you've decided you're taking a career break. What were your expectations and goals for the break beforehand? And then we kind of get into the during. So like, what happened? What'd you do during? And then I asked him like, what was a transformative moment?
Mm.
And because that's a key part of my literature, or not my literature, but my study. That was kind of what drove it. Was like, I believe transformative learning occurs. That's what I thought the most valuable question of the interview was, and I tucked it right in the middle. Just among all the other ones. Like, that's the one I'm most interested in. In that transformative learning question, like, can you describe a transformative moment from your break? For all my participants, they just described these like very innocuous, common moments that might have happened on some random day during the break, or weeks or months after. And I remember the most profound one was a gentleman who described really coming from a point of trauma pre-career break, both in his personal and professional life. And he described one day being on the break, and he woke up, and he's like 6 months in, and he kind of woke up one day, and he realizes, there's no emails to answer, there's no bills to pay, there's no meetings, the house is clean, all the chores are done, like, I don't have anything to do. And he just remembers sitting down at like 39 years old, sitting down in his living room, and he said for the first time in his life, that it was the first time he ever felt like present in the moment and content. Like the universe wasn't pulling at him to go do something. Like he felt like he had to be achieving something or doing something. And he said it was just the most overwhelming moment, just to like be there and be present and to feel content with who he was in that moment, doing nothing. And the number of my participants who described something similar, like just the moment they became okay with the idea of doing nothing. And they use this language, like, I mean, repeatedly. Even the non-English, native English speaking ones, they all kind of said that over and over again, like, oh, my career break totally changed 3 months to 6 months in, once I became okay with doing nothing. Like, and it wasn't about having to produce something. And that's when it all started to make sense, because then it was like, oh, the world has continued to spin, it hasn't blown up, I'm still here, I'm still okay. Oh, maybe my career doesn't have to be the center of my entire life and being. Maybe my career doesn't have to be my purpose for my existence. But for all of them, the transformative moments were not this aha cinematic thing. There was no moment of clarity. There was no like answer to life in the universe. It was just, oh, I felt content, I felt calm, and they had never felt that before.
And how did that live up to your expectation of, you said that was, you thought that would be the most interesting question. Like, what were you expecting from that?
But I expected it to be more of like, I did find my purpose, I did find my meaning. And then that's not what happened. And that's where I think the main value of this research comes in, is that as a career services professional, as a career counselor, a lot of what you hear professionals in this space talk about is helping clients or students find their meaning or purpose in their career. And what my career break participants show is that you don't need that. You don't need that to happen. Like I had one woman who was on that very successful corporate track. She would get promoted every 2 or 3 years, and she was just 30 years old. She'd been promoted 4 times in like this Fortune 100 company, and she took a career break, and she swore, she's like, I will never ever go back to corporate life ever. And she took a 7-month career break, and then unexpectedly she went back to that same role. She went back to the same role, same title. Nothing's changed, but now she likes it because she's changed. She's changed what that job means to her in her life, and how much she defined herself by it before versus how much she defines herself by it now, which is very little, and she has a lot going on in her life outside of that career. So her career is now just a means to an end of allowing her to live a life she wants, but her why exists outside of her career.
Yeah.
Because when I start hearing all my participants kind of say this repeatedly, I'm like, okay, it sounds like I have a lot of apathetic people who want to go live in the woods and disconnect from society and, live off the land and just kind of be antisocial. But that's not the case. Like, these people go on to start their own businesses. They go on to write best-selling books. They go on to get doctorate degrees. So they still have ambition. But the ambition is not about having these like 5 or 10 year career goals and reaching a certain title or salary. It's about, I want to do something that means something to me or allows me to help other people better. Like, I have this thing that I feel drawn to now, and I may not feel drawn to it in 5 or 10 years, and that's okay. But they're not so concerned about having 5 or 10 year goals, because that's another question we ask them in that post career break stage. Like, how did your career break affect your long term career goals? And I very much expected them all to say, well, pre career break, these were my 5 and 10 year goals, and post career break, these are now my 5 and 10 year goals. Every single participant, though, said, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but I actually don't have career goals anymore, and I don't want them. They really just feel content with living a more like in the moment present life, as far as like, what do I need from my job now, or what do I need in life now? Is my career facilitating that goal, or is it impeding it?
And I know that you know Katrina McGee, but she was in the first series of the podcast, and she talked about how her biggest fear was going back to corporate.
Mm.
And that, you know, the reason that she was taking this break was to explore her identity outside of corporate, and that her biggest fear was going back to it. And she went back, but she actually went back, and very similar to one of your participants, and went back, and actually she was fine with it. And it was her fear, but actually it wasn't awful going back to it, because she had changed. And one of the key things was financial freedom. And the quickest and easiest and kind of most efficient way of being able to achieve that was to go back into corporate. So she went back into corporate, but the mindset then was around corporate was working for her. You've touched on identity a few times, so let's delve into that.
That is now the focus of the thesis, is career breaks and career identity. I knew there was an identity component as I was designing my study. I figured it would come up, but I didn't anticipate it being the most prominent or important thing from all of this. Because everything we've talked about so far, it all feeds into this identity thing, as far as like this fear of entering a career break space, of like losing this attachment of who I am. And then when you're in there, really struggling with that kind of loss of identity, and then afterwards this total reframing of it. And so identity is the driving theme across all three phases of the career break. So after we ask them kind of those middle questions of like, you know, what'd you do during the career break, what was the transformative moment, we get into that post career break stage, as far as like, how did it affect your long-term career goals? How did it affect your perceptions of your career and your industry? How did it affect your career identity? And it all ties into that identity component, because like we were saying, the career is part of their identity. If we think of it like a pie chart, before the career break, the career is either dead center, what drives everything else, or it's like occupying a big chunk of that pie. And it's like during the career break, that part of their identity, that career part, either becomes a much smaller sliver, or it even kind of becomes like an ancillary external part of their identity, almost like a satellite. So that way, if it is ever threatened through one of the reasons we mentioned earlier, their core identity is intact and secure. It's not tethered to something so flimsy or vulnerable to change.
And I wonder whether that's where the contentment comes from. Is that if you're content with this, and the career is this, as you say, sort of solar system floating around outside, if you're content with this, you're good.
That's all it came down to. So for the people who were coming from those trauma-filled environments where career was I would say the bigger part of their identity, that was unbelievable for them. And for a lot of my participants, the interviews were like the first time they had really ever reflected on their career break. Because most often what people ask them is, did you have a good time? Do you have any cool photos to share? What was like the coolest part of it? They want to hear about that. And the interviews I'm asking them is the first time, it's like, you know, what pushed you into this? What was life like? You know, what kind of challenges did you encounter? What did you expect? What was the transformative moment? How did it change how you think about yourself? So more than half of my participants cried during the interviews.
Yeah, wow.
Very emotional space. I cannot express the gratitude I have to them for all 24 being so candid and insightful. Every single one of them was incredibly articulate, insightful, and thoughtful, and open with a relative stranger. I mean, there was no pre-meeting. There was no like, hey, let's get to know each other. It was like, all right, you've been invited to do an interview. Please pick a time, and we're going to do this. And we have this 90-minute interview, and you kind of try and establish a rapport. And that's where my career counseling background comes into help, because I can quickly establish that rapport. But you know, a couple of them were very skeptical in those initial once we got on the call. They're like, so you have any questions before we get started? And a couple of them were like, yeah, why are you doing this? Like, what do you get out of this? Why are you interested in career breaks? Like, are you against them? Are you for them? And it's like, well, I can't really tell you that, but you know, here's a little about me, and you know, this is what the research is based on. And they're like, okay, and then you know, you just have a conversation, kind of like we're having now, and they start to open up. And like I said, I had 24 incredible people, and it's because of their candor and their insightfulness that we have this amazing data that we're so excited to share and research over the next couple of years.
And it's totally reflected in the conversations that I've had. Everybody has been so wonderfully honest and vulnerable in a space that, you know, you could argue is safe, because actually it's out there for the public and anybody to hear on a podcast, but they have been amazing. And I think what another sort of trend that's come through is how passionate they are all about their own career breaks and how it's changed them. And you mentioned career identity. What sort of exploratory questioning or anything was around identity outside of career. Like, did you delve into whether anything had shifted for them personally throughout their break?
We have a preset list of questions that every interview is going to be like structured around, but that's why we call them semi-structured interviews, because you're going to cover those questions to be consistent across your findings. But depending on what they say, you're going to ask impromptu follow-ups, and that's where we get into a lot of that stuff. So again, I was not expecting the identity thing to be a big thing, or I thought it, again, I anticipated it being more like, I felt like a much stronger career identity, or I felt like my career finally aligned, like I said, like finding meaning and purpose through my career. Like I know what I'm meant to do now, because in the survey we asked them, like, what was your job pre-career break versus post, and did it change? And it's about like 60% change. 40% go back to like a similar role or the same role. But again, with my interview participants, it was just this repeated thing of like, I feel like I don't need a career identity. I don't want a career identity, or my career identity is a much smaller piece of the pie, or I feel like it's about who I am outside of my career that matters more now. Those were the consistent things. They all kind of framed it differently and had different metaphors that they used, but the overarching thing is they all detached from this idea of my career is going to define me. And the way I just presented at a big conference in Australia earlier this month, I kind of opened it up with, why is it that whenever we meet someone new, we immediately ask about their occupation? We could ask almost anything about their interests, their values, their backgrounds, and their aspirations, and yet still we ask, so what do you do? And it's because society, for whatever reason, has really driven us to think about careers as the end-all be-all. And that's reflective in how we're taught about careers in primary school. We have career days, people from the community come in, talk about jobs. Throughout adolescence, we're constantly asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? As if you have to be this one thing to contribute to society. At 18 years old, it's okay, what do you want to major in? What do you want to be for the rest of your life? And it's just this, all my participants are examples of how that kind of ideology is destructive. And or for some people, not for everyone, because obviously we have people who really feel quite content with that way of thinking. So it's not to say my participants are reflective of all of human thinking, but for the people who choose career breaks, at least, that's where this is coming from. It's coming from this disillusionment at some point in their career that, like, hey, I was told that if I did this and I played by the rules and I made all the right choices, I would have a fulfilling, happy life. Why am I so unhappy? Why do I feel so discontent? Why do I feel like something's missing, even for the people who are in those dream jobs? Why do I feel like I haven't lived my best life, or why do I feel like some hole, there's a hole in me somewhere? And it's because so much of what they've been led to believe is, about this career, this thing that what's going to be your legacy, what's going to be your purpose and your why. And that's why I am now so adamant about encouraging career professionals, especially like career counselors, to stop thinking about careers as this, what's your why, or what's your purpose, what's your meaning? Because it's good to have like some sort of intentionality to your careers and feel like it's something you enjoy doing. Not to say like people should just put up with bad jobs, but you should have something going on outside of that. And you should have something else that like fulfills you. It shouldn't just be that.
The reason I ask about the identity outside of the career piece is because a lot of the individuals that I work with, there's a fear element of, what if I change so much that I don't go back to what I am doing all my life, or my, it's this almost fear of
change. Yeah.
And I had a wonderful lady, Juliana, who shared her story around her husband wasn't supportive of her career break in the beginning, and she still took it, and she traveled without him, and she explored her own value and purpose and strengths on her own. And that's a hell of a courageous thing to do, thinking that actually a shift or a transformation could potentially change things totally. Now, actually, their marriage is stronger than ever, and it's absolutely solidified their relationship. But there was another alternative in there. So it's that's why I asked that question around the sort of identity outside of career.
I did have two participants who unexpectedly lost their jobs between the time they scheduled the interview and the time we did them. And both of them said, if this had happened and I hadn't taken a career break, I'd be having a full identity crisis. But, I lost my job due to budget cuts. I don't feel any shame. I don't feel any embarrassment. Like this happens and I'm okay. Like I know who I am and that's enough. So especially as we're getting into a period of society or human existence where job insecurity is very high. But then I have these career break participants who, because they know who they are outside of their career, that doesn't scare them anymore. I had a guy who was a surgeon who took a career break, not even knowing if he would go back into medicine. He's like, it helped me realize that I don't need surgery to like have a good life or to like have a good existence. Like if I had to do something else, if I couldn't do surgery anymore, I could and I'd be fine. I'd still be happy.
You mentioned fear around taking a career break for the worry of what it will do to somebody's employability later. What were the findings around whether it did jeopardize someone's career? Like, I have my own thoughts, but I wonder what the research tells us.
The survey says a little different, but again, the survey is apples and oranges because it is so many different types of career breaks. People who did get fired, people who were forced out of their jobs or physically could not do their job anymore
Yeah.
due to illness or something. But for my 24 interview participants who did so voluntarily, as I said, nothing, no issues
Yeah,
getting
okay,
a
wow.
job they wanted and like, but none of them had any issues finding jobs when they were ready to.
What an amazing message to the audience around the 24 participants that you interviewed. Not one of them said that it jeopardized their careers. So for anybody who is thinking that they want to take a career break, but that's what worries them, it's almost proof that it shouldn't. So what I'd love you to do, Patrick, is summarize your key findings, but also then summarize the myths that you debunked, because that's one of my real whys behind this podcast is to really myth bust.
The easy summary is we had 24 people who had nothing in common. Everything about them was different backgrounds, different identities, different professional, different education levels, different incomes, different countries, everything. Their reasons for taking a career break, very different, diverse, as we mentioned. What they did during the break, again, very different, no similarities. And yet, when we get to the end, even for the people who had bad career break years, all 24 of them, when they talk about how the career break changed them and changed how they think about career and the role it plays in their life, they all used the same language repeatedly. I mean, that is a legitimate phenomenon to have such a diverse group of people with nothing in common all have the same language in how they describe how an experience changed the way they think about a concept such as a career.
I actually have goosebumps.
I get real passionate talking about it. I have definitely gotten quite emotional thinking about like the impact of that. As far as like the myths go, I think the first myth was, that career breaks are exclusively for affluent individuals, those with lots of tertiary education, those with like high salaries who can afford not working. But my career break research, it debunks that because I had people who were, maybe considered low income and they didn't have like tertiary education, they didn't have advanced degrees, and they still did this and they came out of it successfully. Second career break being that they're only taken as a last resort, which we talked about because they're not. Some people are doing this from a very positive space, but just trying to maybe pursue certain life goals and satisfy like some sort of aspirational thing outside of work. The third one being that career breaks are going to be a nice respite from life's responsibilities. You're going to go have this nice relaxing period, and you can like put all your worries aside, and you can go have your wanderlust adventure and live out all your hedonistic desires, and then you can resume normal life, and everything will be fine. And that is a totally busted. It is shattered to smithereens because career breaks are arguably guaranteed to be somewhat stressful. Like in terms of even if you have this great adventure, that will be filled with challenges. If you stay home and play it safe, you're going to deal with the internal challenges. No matter what, those internal challenges will come into play. And then career breaks are going to reset your career is another myth. I'm going to have this career break. I'll figure out what I meant to do with my life, and then I'll go do that. And again, for my participants, it was no like, oh, I know what I meant to do. It had nothing to do with that. There was no great epiphany. It was just, oh, maybe careers don't have to be what drives me and what defines me. I think the overall message is rethink what careers mean to us in our life and how we define ourselves by them and how much we connect ourselves to that identity of a career. And then as far as the career break space goes, is giving it a little more acceptance and validity in terms of like people come from this and they grow, they change. This is not them going to sit on a beach somewhere drinking Mai Tais or just watching Netflix and catching up on all their shows. Like, no matter what, they're coming out of it different. Like there is some sort of either internal learning that occurs, or they have some sort of external experience where they learn to like interact with others. They have better cultural appreciation. They have more empathy. They are more resilient, more adaptable. These are the skills my participants described they felt like were more enhanced.
And for an employer, that should be music to their ears, right? Is
Yeah.
that, you know, these people have gone on to not only professionally develop but personally as well, and bringing all of those different attributes and personal attributes into their company and role. But look, thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful and a real different perspective on career breaks. If people want to find you or get in touch, where is best?
LinkedIn. That's about the only social media I engage with.
That's how we met.
Yep.
I'll pop your LinkedIn in the show notes. And the other thing is, when's the research published? Like, where are you at on the journey?
There's quite a process that goes in. So we've had a conceptual article kind of like setting up this research in review for a few months now. And hopefully we'll have an answer on that in a couple of weeks. But the first empirical article will hopefully be submitted to a journal at the start of next year in 2025, and then maybe published 5 to 6 months after that. The way we're going to publish these is around the phases of career breaks. So we'll have our first article about that pre-career break decision making, and then the next article will be about what happens during and the challenges that occur in the transformative learning.
I love it.
And then the third one will be all about those outcomes as far as goals and identity. So hopefully in the next 2 years, those will all kind of be out and open.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Patrick.
Thank you for having me. This is a real honor, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
And a heart full of soul, it's connected. And I'm moving along, I won't let it all turn the other cheek.
Thanks for listening. I really do appreciate each and every one of you taking the time to join us. Thanks so much to Patrick for sharing his fascinating and deep knowledge in all things career breaks. Yet another reminder, but this time backed with evidence, that maybe we need to stop framing careers as the be-all and end-all to our identity. Thank you to Auntie Bea at the Flaxen, my patient and talented producer, and a special shout out to the incredibly talented Joanna Cook, whose soulful blend of smooth vocals we're lucky enough to use throughout the show. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you could like and rate the show, and even leave a positive comment if you want to make my day. Also, if you think a friend would like this episode, please do buzz it over to them. Your support means so much, and spreading the word helps even more. Do you have a sabbatical story to share, or maybe you know someone whose journey would inspire others? Do let me know. You can get in touch via Sabbatical Stories Podcast on Instagram, or message me on LinkedIn. I'm Bex Thomas. Until next time, take care of yourself, keep dreaming big, and remember, your sabbatical story is just waiting to be written.
could somehow steal you away from how you feel. Appreciate your situation. Let's try to keep this real. And it's like she said, we're all affected, yeah. And it's like he said.